everybody. It's your host. My name is Professor Khalil Amani, and this is Khalil Amani's World 100. Welcome back for part three of our Sodom and Gomorrah series. Now, if you haven't seen part one, the introduction, or part two, yesterday, I invite you to start. I said I invite you to start with part one and work your way to part three. But as I always say, if you're a Billy Badass in scripture, jump your behind right on in here. Oh yeah. Because you are going to learn about Sodom and Gomorrah as taught by a master teacher, moi. And I teach Sodom and Gomorrah like no other you've ever heard. What you're going to hear on this here channel about Sodom and Gomorrah, you've never heard. Trust and believe that. I teach Sodom and Gomorrah like no Christian preacher, like no Israelite teacher. I have a different outlook on the subject. Oh, yes, I do. Yes, I do. And I've had this outlook for over 30 years. Great revelation when I began to study Sodom and Gomorrah. Understanding Sodom and Gomorrah, it requires more than reading Genesis 18 and Genesis 19. If that's all you've ever read was Genesis 18 and Genesis 19 about Sodom and Gomorrah, then you don't know shit about Sodom and Gomorrah. Question number one. You think you know about Sodom and Gomorrah? Name the cities that were destroyed with Sodom and Gomorrah. I'll wait. Oh, you didn't know? You didn't know that there were more cities destroyed besides just Sodom and Gomorrah? You didn't know that? You've never heard of Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, aka Bela. You're already at a disadvantage if you think you're going to come over here and know some shit. You didn't even know that, did you? You didn't know that it was more than Sodom and Gomorrah that was destroyed by God. You left out 50% of the story. There were hundreds of thousands of other people in two other cities, Admah and Zeboim, that was destroyed. The fifth city was not destroyed, Zoar, because Lot escaped from Sodom and he went to Zoar before he went up into the mountains and fucked his daughters. We're going to get to all of that today. But if you think you know the story of Sodom and Gomorrah and you don't even know that there were 4 cities that were destroyed and not just 2, you're already out of pocket. Heel pain and sore arches. You're already out of pocket. That's right. Everybody wants to talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, but nobody wants to talk about the other 2 cities that were destroyed with Sodom and Gomorrah. Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim are the 4 cities that were destroyed by fire and brimstone by God Almighty. How come you don't know about that? How come when you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, many of you just say Sodom was destroyed? Well, what about the other 3 cities? And if you think you know a little bit, you might say Sodom and Gomorrah. But I ain't heard a Christian preacher, I ain't heard an Israelite teacher yet mention Admah and Zeboim, the 3rd and 4th cities that were destroyed with Sodom and Gomorrah. The reason they don't mention them because those cities are not that popular. They're unimportant, and a lot of Bible teachers don't even know that. They don't know that. They are just like parakeets and Polly-wanted crackers. Polly-wanted cracker, pop! Polly-wanted cracker. They just regurgitate and upchuck and vomit and hurl and ape and recite that which they've heard when they were children. Sodom and Gomorrah. But understand that there were more than Sodom and Gomorrah that were destroyed. There were 4 cities. But there were 5 cities that were bad. Bad, bad, bad. Sodom was bad. Gomorrah was bad. Admah was bad. Zeboim was bad. And Zoar was bad. But 4 of those 5 cities were destroyed. The only reason that the 5th city wasn't destroyed, the city of Zoar, aka Bela, it was spared the wrath of God because Lot and his family had been chosen to go there. The angels had pushed them to go there for refuge, safety. Lot's presence in Zoar spared the city of Zoar. But I just want you to know, don't come over here thinking you know. Because you don't. Did you also know that Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, collectively they were called the cities of the plain. Oh yeah. Where's my notes on that? I'm tripping. Cities of the plain, they were called cities of the plain. I'm throwing my notes away. Ah, here they go. Here they go. Here they go. Okay. Cities of the plain, they were called. You can read about it in Genesis 19:29 and Genesis 13:12. I said Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar. Those 5 cities collectively were called the cities of the plain. Genesis 13:12, Genesis 19 and 30, you will see the phrase cities of the plain. And when you see the phrase cities of the plain, you know they're talking about those 5 cities that were in league. They were a confederation. They were a closed off group of cities that did not want a lot to do with anything around them outside of their cities. They built fences and gates and walls to protect themselves from strangers, interlopers, and anyone that wasn't a resident of those cities. Does the Bible tell you that? Hell to the no, no. The Bible doesn't tell you that. You got to read outside the Bible. You got to be a studier of historical scriptures and stuff like that. Biblical times and whatnot.
Any of these 3
That's right.
mistakes in 2025.
Biblical times. All right. Commercials, we out. But this is part 3 of Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboim and Zoar. I mean, think about it. All of your ignorant Christian lives, all of your so-called, I'm smarter now because I'm a Hebrew Israelite lives, none of your teachers have ever told you that there were more than just Sodom and Gomorrah that were destroyed and burned down to the ground. No one talks about the other cities. No one explains to you that Sodom and Gomorrah were a part of a confederacy, a league of 5 cities. No one told you that these 5 cities were collectively known as the cities of the plain. No one told you that these 5 cities were a group of stingy and inhospitable people that did not like strangers and foreigners and interlopers and visitors coming to their cities. They were a closed off society. But how would you know that? Just by reading your King James Bible. You wouldn't know that. So you come teaching ill-equipped without the background of the cities that you want to teach about. And so already, in the first 5 minutes, you've learned that there were 4 cities that were burned to the ground. You've heard the names of the 4 cities: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, and Zeboim. You've also learned in the first 5 minutes that there were 5 cities collectively: Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboim, and Zoar, aka Bela, that were called the cities of the plains. In the first 5 minutes, you've already learned that these cities were a collective. They were a federation. Now, I got the books to show you that. I'm just talking right now. Don't say cite no sources. You can go look this stuff up. This is matter-of-factly stuff. This is Bible 101. This is Bible History 101. And if you didn't know that, that means you're not even on Bible History 101 level. I'm stunting. I'm flexing. Now let's get into the subject. That rant was just the result of people thinking that they know about Sodom and Gomorrah. I just gave you some information that I know you didn't know. You can't get it strictly from the Bible. How would you know that there were a confederation of cities and they had a closed society and they didn't like strangers and foreigners and interlopers or visitors coming to their cities? How would you know that? It's not written in the Bible. You got to study outside of the Bible is what I'm saying. You got to do the history. The history, as my grandfather used to say. Yeah, you gotta dig deep. You gotta dig deep. Now let's get back on track on this part 3. We're gonna talk a little bit more about Lot. You see, the ideal that Lot was some great person because he tried to protect angels. I'm not buying it. I'm sorry. I'm not sorry. Lot was as wicked as everybody in Sodom. Not only was Lot wicked, his family was wicked. I know you never saw that in the Bible. I know no Christian preacher or no Israelite preacher teaches that Lot was wicked. But Lot was wicked. Lot was a spineless cretin. Lot was a fucked up father. Lot was a foolish man. Lot had the spine of a snail, of a worm. There goes that fly. He been here all night and now he wants to show up. I closed my door last night because I knew the fly was in here, but he wouldn't show himself. And now he just pops up right over here by me. But I got the spray for him. Goddamn fly. All right. How dare you mess up my goddamn show. Fly. Oh, they nasty. He'll get on my window. And when he goes on my window, I'm going to go over there and get him. I'm just waiting for him to get on my window. You know, they always go to the window. Oh, shit, he's back over here. You got some balls. You got some balls. I can't believe this fly is interrupting my show. Can't drink out of that no more. Sprayed in that. But he just came over here. Goddamn. Put that water down there. Can't drink out of that no more. I better keep this in my hand for a moment. I don't believe this fly. He's been in here for 24 hours since yesterday's show. I closed my door so that he would just die in here, and he's still running around. Ain't had no water, no food. He's still active. There he goes right there. An exercise in futility. I think that might have got him because, boy, he tried to get away and he just was all up in the spray. We'll see. We'll see. Damn. Real world stuff. I'm going to open my window because that fly spray is pretty thick up in here. It's pretty thick up in here. Let's get a little air in this thing. I think I got it. I think he got a good dose on that last one because I caught his ass good. But we'll see. Back to what we talking about. God damn. But yeah, we've only been here, what, 17 minutes? You've learned a lot already. But on this part 3, I want to explain the wickedness of Lot. Never in my Christian church history have I heard a preacher preach that Lot was also wicked as the Sodomites. Never when I was a Hebrew Israelite did I hear Yahweh ben Yahweh, my cult teacher, teach that Lot was as wicked as the Sodomites. Since I've been on YouTube, I ain't heard a Christian or Israelite pastor, preacher yet teach that Lot was as wicked as the Sodomites. I mean, one thing we should think about. Now I got an airplane going. It's making a lot of noise. A lot of noise. I know he'll leave, but he's too loud for me. Jesus Christ. They don't want me to work today, but we're going to work. We're going to work. Have you ever thought about this? Have you ever asked yourself the question, why would Lot even reside in a so-called homosexual city? I mean, the city of Sodom and Gomorrah, they weren't strictly homosexual. As I've explained on part 1 and part 2, they were just like any city in America. They were just like San Francisco. They had a really good gay population. They were like Atlanta, has a really good gay population. But for the sake of you youngins out there who want to think that Sodom and Gomorrah were strictly homosexual, that's what you all say. And if you believe that Sodom and Gomorrah were homosexual cities strictly, have you ever asked yourself or pondered, why would Lot and his wife and children live in a strictly homosexual city? The very fact that Lot and his wife and his children lived in Sodom is only proof positive that Sodom was not just a homosexual city. That can be understood by Lot's presence in Sodom. That can be extrapolated. That can be pulled out of the narrative that if you have a heterosexual man and his wife and children living in Sodom, it's only verification that Sodom and Gomorrah were not homosexual cities strictly. Duh! But I contend that Lot was evil to Lot was a fucked up character too. In part 2, we read Genesis chapter 18, where God talks to Abraham, and God tells Abraham, I'm going to destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for their wickedness. And Abraham tries as he may to dissuade, to persuade God from burning the cities. Abraham would go on to make the argument that what if there's 50 good people, 50 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Would you, God, destroy the whole city even though there's 50 righteous people in the city? And God says, no, I wouldn't do that. If you find 50, I'll spare Sodom and Gomorrah. Abraham snaps back. Well, what if there was 5 less? What if there was 45 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah? Would you still destroy the cities of Sodom? And God would clap back, no, if you find 45 good people in Sodom, I'll spare the city from destruction. But that wasn't good enough for Abraham. He took it a step further. Well, what if there was 40 good people? Would you still destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? To which God said, no, I'd spare the city for 40 good people, 40 righteous people. But Abraham, in his allying with Sodom and Gomorrah, with his, somehow Abraham had a special, bond with Sodom. For some reason, Abraham wanted to advocate for the safety of Sodom and Gomorrah. So he pressed the issue and said, well, what if there was 30 good people? Would you still destroy Sodom and Gomorrah for 30 good people? And God said, no. If you find 30 good people, I'll spare Sodom and Gomorrah from being destroyed. But there's something about Sodom and Gomorrah that Abraham loved. Abraham loved the dirty draws of Sodom so much that he was not satisfied with God telling him 30 people will cause Sodom to be saved. So he pressed God again. Well, what if there was only 20 good people? 20 righteous people? Would you still destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? God looked at this motherfucker and said, nigga, I said I would not destroy the city for 30. Of course, I wouldn't destroy Sodom if you found 20 good and righteous people. I'll give them a stay of execution. You would have thought that would have been enough for Abraham. But there was something about Sodom and Gomorrah that Abraham, he wanted a shown up 100% guarantee for the safety of Sodom and Gomorrah. Now we knew he had a nephew that lived there. Maybe he was taking God to task for his nephew's sake. But in chapter 18 of Genesis, Abraham never mentions that he has a nephew he's trying to save. And so Abraham would go a step further. He was really getting on God's nerves. And he said, God, Yahweh, if there were 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, would you still destroy Sodom and Gomorrah? And God looked at this motherfucker and said, God damn. No, I wouldn't, Abraham. If you find 10 righteous people in Sodom and Gomorrah, I will spare the city from destruction. That's as close as you get to 0, 10. And it was at this moment when God says, I would not destroy the city if you can find 10 righteous people. It should have been at that very moment where Abraham says, well, let me say this to you, God. I got family in Sodom. I got a beautiful nephew named Lot in Sodom. He's a straight heterosexual black man's God. He has a beautiful wife, and he has daughters and sons, and he has son-in-laws. I think that's about 10, 11, 12 people, God, between my nephew, his wife, his children. He had daughters, and he had sons. That's about 8, 9. And then I have son-in-laws that are married to my daughters. That's over 10 people. I think you should spare Sodom for my kinsman's sake, God. That's what Abraham should have said when Abraham got God down to number 10. But Abraham doesn't. God goes his way. Abraham goes his way. Abraham shaking in his boots. For some reason, Abraham didn't feel the notion to speak up on behalf of his nephew Lot before God. Why didn't he? Maybe because Abraham knew that Lot was evil and unrighteous too. Can we consider that? Should we consider that? I mean, from the reading of Genesis 18, we have to consider that Lot and his family, they were counted amongst the unrighteous. There's more evidence that suggests that Lot was unrighteous than that he was righteous. The very fact that God says in Genesis 18 that there aren't even 10 righteous people in Sodom, and Lot is from Sodom, it puts him into that number. That Sodom had no righteous people. And that would mean Lot himself was an unrighteous motherfucker. Not just Lot, his wife, and his children. And as we are going to see, that was the case. I know you've never heard it like this. I know you never heard it like this. Every time you talk about Sodom and Gomorrah, and we get to the Lot story, you think Lot was somebody special because he invited a couple of angels into his house. You give Lot a pass, a hall pass for his unrighteousness. You forget what you read one chapter earlier in Genesis 18 where God says, find me 10 righteous people and I'll spare the city. And Abraham couldn't do it. And then you go to the next chapter, Genesis 19, and it starts about Lot sitting at the gates and gets up and runs towards the two angels. And you forget that Lot himself is part of the unrighteousness of Sodom according to the last chapter. I know you never heard it like this. I get it. That's why you should pay attention and watch this series. I'm not going to bring Sodom and Gomorrah to you like anybody you ever heard. Bet that, bet that, bet that. For real though, for real though. Genesis 18 tells us that every motherfucker in Sodom was unrighteous. Genesis chapter 18 tells us that the sin of Sodom and Gomorrah was very grievous. The word grievous means bad. I think we should look at that scripture real quick. We're going to look at that scripture real quick. I said the sin of Sodom. When we go to Genesis 18, verse 20, and the Lord said, because the cry of Sodom and Gomorrah is great, and because their sin is very grievous. You see that letter T up there? We go on the side, we go look at verse 20 and see what the T means. So we go to the center column, we go down to 20, and it tells you it means bad. Grievous means bad. So God is articulating to Abraham that the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah are great, and because their sin is very grievous, very bad. This is where Lot chose to live. And we know from the story of the intercession of Abraham, the 50, to spare the 50 for the righteous. See? And then the 45, where it says, 50 destroyed that place as his slaves just wicked. It starts with 50, right? 50 righteous still passing. Lord says, and just take upon the dust. Oh, here it is. And then we go down to the 45. There it is, the 40. That's the 40. Here it is. Here it is. Wilt thou destroy all the cities for lack of 5? Meaning subtract 5 from the 50. And he, God, said, if I find there 40 and 5 or 45, I will not destroy the city. And then he goes down to 40, and then 30, and then 20, and then 10. And after God says, I'll save the city if you find 10 righteous people, what happens next? And the Lord went his way as soon as he had left communing with Abraham. And Abraham returned unto his place. See, that's where Abraham was supposed to tell God about his so-called righteous nephew Lot and his family. But Abraham doesn't. Why doesn't he? Because Abraham some kind of way knows that Lot is counted amongst the unrighteous. You never seen that. I know you never saw it that way. I get it. I know you never saw it that way. But Lot and his family is counted amongst the unrighteous. Scam likely. See, that fly is gone. I think I got him. But I better not speak too soon. I think he's somewhere on the floor going, he finally got me. Anyway. Lot, Abraham never name drops Lot as one of the good people of Sodom. That's telling. That should make you do a side eye, a mean side eye, that Uncle Abraham didn't speak up for his nephew Lot during that exchange with God. It's telling that Abraham would allow God to say that his own kinsman was unrighteous also. That's what God said in so many words. God said that there's nobody in Sodom that's worthy of life. And Abraham didn't buck against it. Abraham didn't name drop his nephew. Abraham didn't say, hold on there, God. My family is there and they ain't bad people. They're good peoples. They're good peoples, God. Abraham didn't do that. He allowed God to say that everybody in Sodom ain't shit. You never saw it like that, have you? And then we go to Genesis 19. And the first thing we get is a do-gooder named Lot that tries to help two angels. He looks like a do-gooder. And because he invites the two angels into his house out of harm's way and wants to feed them and wash their feet and give them a bed to sleep on at night, we get sidetracked. We forget everything we read in Genesis 18. We forget that God said ain't nobody in Sodom good. That the whole town of Sodom and Gomorrah were a bunch of wicked mofos. We forget that. We are blinded by Lot's hospitality and generosity. Yes, we are. We're blinded by it. We don't go into Genesis 19 thinking whoever's talking about Sodom, whoever the inhabitants of Sodom are, they're wicked and they are unrighteous. We don't go into that chapter thinking that. When we should. Anybody that lives in Sodom, we should look at them through the lens of unrighteousness. Because chapter 18 tells us, God tells us that they are all unrighteous. But we don't. Most of us probably don't even read the chapter before Lot comes on the scene. So you don't even have a proper lens to view Lot. But if you happen to have read chapter 18 that leads into the Lot story, if you read it with clarity and understanding, you have to read anybody in Genesis 19 that is from the city of Sodom, you have to view them as unrighteous based on chapter 18. What Christian preacher does that? What Israelite teacher does that? They began to talk about Lot as though he was an anomaly, as though he had some aberrant or aberrant ways. Aberrant or aberrant means wandering from the norm. That the norm of Sodom and Gomorrah was wickedness and sinfulness and homosexuality. But some kind of way, Lot, he was a wandering from the norm of that society. The norm of that society was wickedness and wretchedness and evil and sinfulness and so-called homosexuality. But somehow, we think that Lot was a wandering from the norm, that his actions were aberrant or aberrant. Because Lot is introduced as a do-gooder. But going back to Genesis 18, God does not lay out and spell out the sins of Sodom and Gomorrah. God simply gives us a very generic. He throws a blanket over those cities and just say they were bad. He says their sins were very grievous. What does that mean? God doesn't say their sins were homosexuality. How do we get there, people? How do we put words in God's mouth? He said their sin was very grievous. And we today in 2025, in the 21st century and the 20th century, we have interpreted God saying that the sin of Sodom was very grievous. We have narrowed that shit down to one thing. Listening to you Christians and listening to you Israelites, we've narrowed that very grievous sin down to one thing: homosexuality. What an unrighteous thing to do. To label one demographic of the population as being the reason for 4 cities' destruction. Oh, we've been so wrong. We've been so wrong. And so, let's enter Lot. Lot is going to do a few things we're going to find out that actually prove that this motherfucker too was unrighteous. Oh yeah, he going to. He starts out doing a goody two shoes. He starts doing a Boy Scout kind of thing. He starts out doing a good thing, by welcoming two angels and telling them and praying that they come and stay with him for the night. He's going to feed them and wash their feet. And the angels say to Lot, thank you, but no thank you. We will abide. We will stay in the streets of Sodom all night. To which Lot says, I don't think that's a good thing. I beg you. The Bible says that Lot pressed greatly upon them to get out the fucking streets. It wasn't safe to come in and sup and dine and rest their weary bodies. To which the angels agree. Okay, we'll come in for the night. We'll come in. But we're on a mission. We are not here to save you, Lot. God, Yahweh, Yahuwah, Yahweh, Jehovah has told us that there's not even 10 righteous people in the cities of Sodom and Gomorrah. That includes you, Lot. God didn't tell us that there was a righteous man named Lot that we should save. No, he didn't. And we know that God did not talk to these angels and tell them that there's a righteous man named Lot, because when the angels came, they rejected Lot's first proposal to come and stay at his house. That's proof positive that God and the angels had nothing to do with Lot. Now let's read the story, because it's evident to me that Genesis 18, when God says, find me 10 righteous people and I'll spare the cities, and Abraham walked away dejected because he knew he couldn't find 10 righteous people, not even among his own kinsmen. We're going to see when we get to Genesis 19 that Lot wasn't shit either. I know you never heard it this way. And so we get to Genesis 19. I said we get to Genesis 19. And there came two angels to Sodom at even, around 7 or 8 o'clock in the evening time. And Lot sat in the gate of Sodom. And Lot, seeing them, rose up to meet them. And he bowed himself with his face toward the ground. Lot showed humility. He understood that these two angels, these two men, were somebody special. And he, Lot, said, behold now, my lords, turn in, I pray you, into your servant's house, and tarry and wait and stay all night, and wash your feet, and you shall rise up early and go on your ways. And they, the two angels, said, nay, no, but we will abide in the street all night. We're going to come back to why the angels wanted to abide in the streets all night. We'll come back to that. And he, Lot, pressed upon them greatly. He begged them, he demanded, he implored them to get out the fucking street. And they, the two angels, turned in unto him, Lot, into his house, and entered into his house. And he, Lot, made them a feast, and did bake unleavened bread, and they did eat. Now, let's get to it. It's called the wickedness of the men of Sodom. But before they lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round, both old and young, all the people from every quarter. And they called unto Lot and said unto him, where are the men which came in to thee this night? Bring them out unto us, that we may know them, that we may have sex with them. And Lot went out at the door unto them, and shut the door after them, and said, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. So Lot goes outside, he closes his door behind him, and he tries to reason with these men outside by saying, I pray you, brethren, do not so wickedly. But check this out. But now I have two daughters which have not known man. Let me, I pray you, bring them out unto you, and do ye to them as is good in your eyes. Only unto these men do nothing. For therefore came they under the shadow of my roof. Let's stop there. There's a lot going on. There's a lot going on. Let me just check something. Okay. There's a lot going on. And so on one hand, see, this is where you Christians and you Israelites, this is where you get the deer in the headlights syndrome, I call it. You get the deer in the headlight syndrome when you read the first 5 verses of Genesis 19. What do I mean by the deer in the headlight syndrome? You've heard the phrase, you're like a deer in the headlights. You're like a deer in the headlights. You're like a deer in the headlights. What does that mean? Well, if you know anything about deers, when you drive in a car at night and you're going down the highway, and it's happened to me. You're going down the highway at 75 miles an hour, down a lonely highway road with a lot of shrubbery and bushes and trees along the highway. There's deers in those bushes, in those trees. And at nighttime, they come out and they step on the highway. And what had happened is they go and they look and they see approaching car headlights. All they see is 2 white orbs, 2 white lights coming towards them. And the deers, not knowing that their life is on the line, that they should run off the highway and get back in the bushes, they get fixated. They get in a trance. And they stare. Those deer's eyeballs stare right at the lights of the oncoming vehicle, car, bus, 18-wheeler truck. They don't have the sense that God gave a dog to get off the road. They're in a trance. They're fixated on the lights that are getting bigger and brighter every second as the car moves, as the 18-wheeler moves towards them. They're standing in the middle of a highway, transfixed on those 2 white lights, cars or trucks coming their way. And next thing you know, the car or the 18-wheeler, before they have a chance to swerve or brake, before they get a chance to see that there is a fucking big-ass buck, big-ass deer in the middle of the highway, they run head-on into the deer. The deer is smashed to smithereens because he's transfixed. His eyes can't move away from the lights. Just to tell you, it happened to me. I was coming from Arizona, coming up Highway 25 at about 9:30 at night on Interstate 25 North, going through a very dark part of the highway. I had a little 190 Mercedes. I was trying to get to Denver because I was still going to go out that night. I was 36 years old, driving my little 190 Mercedes. I was about 2 hours from Denver. Dark on the highway. And the next thing I knew, I hit a goddamn deer. Oh, I saw the deer. But by the time I saw the deer, it was too late for me to swerve. And swerving would have probably made my car flip over, backflip, and killed me. I hit that deer at 75 miles an hour, straight in his gut. He was on the highway like this. And I hit him like this. I hit him square in his stomach. Boom! And his body whipped around. His head and body whipped around and hit my door. Put a big dent in it. And totally destroyed my front end. When I pulled off the road, I pulled off the road into some light. I waited till the next exit, found the gas station where there was some light to see the damage. The car was still running. But I couldn't even get out of my door. It was banged in. I had to go across the passenger seat. And when I looked at the damage, I could see that his entrails, his guts, his large and small intestines were in my engine. I don't know where he was at. He's on the road. And I rode that car. I kept that car on. I didn't want to turn it off. And I made it all the way to Denver. And I parked it. And the next morning, when the sun came up, I went out there. I opened the trunk, and the whole motor was green. It was green. It was his shit, his bile, his, the intestines, the stuff that's in the intestines is called bile. It's green. It was all, and then I looked down and I saw his large intestines was in my motor. Yes?
I got a vacuum, so I'll try not to be too loud.
Okay. All right, I got about a half hour. His large intestines was in my motor. And that was the end of that car. But going back to the story of Sodom and Gomorrah, you folks, when you read Genesis chapter 19, you get the deer in the headlights syndrome. You get the deer in the headlights syndrome when you read about these men of Sodom wanting to bang, wanting to have sex with, wanting to fuck these angels. You get the deer in the headlight syndrome. Why do I say that? Because you stop right there and you assume that the city of Sodom was a homosexual city, strictly speaking, number one. You also assume that there were no women or children involved in the fracas to get some angel booty. All you see is even the men of Sodom surrounded the house. And the men said, "Where are those two men you have in your house? Bring them out so that we may know them." You get the deer in the headlights. You don't even see the rest of the scripture, which suggests that there was more than just men looking to violate angels. Oh, you didn't see it? Well, let's go back and let me show it to you. Okay. And so, it said, before they, the angels, lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round about, both old and young. See, young men, these are teenage boys. Now, what does the next piece of the verse says? All the people from every quarter. Oh, it's time for you to take off your horse blinders. It's time for you to snap that deer in the headlight syndrome. Yes, it was the men, because men are always in charge in biblical days. Men run shit. Men give orders. Men are the leaders. Men start the fracas. So yes, it was the men of the city, even the men of Sodom. And the fact that it says it was the men of the city implies that there are women in the city and there are others in the city. And if there are women in the city, it means that this city was not just about some homosexuals. Do you get that? The men of the city, even the men of Sodom. That implies that there are women there. But it was the men that took the charge that started the fracas, the ruckus, started the riot, started the booty bandit chase. That it was the men of the city that compassed the house roundabout. But not just men. It says it was all men and young men. Old men back in biblical days is 30 and 40 years old. Young men is like 10, 11, 12. They was both old and young trying to rape the angels. But going further, what does that say? All the people from every quarter. So if all the people from every quarter surrounded the house, since when did people only mean men? Since when did people only mean males? Since when did people only mean teenage boys or grown men, I ask you? People means men, women, and children. That's right. How do we miss that? How do we miss the fact that this was not about homosexuality, that this was about the violation of angels by men, women, and children? Oh yeah. Now I know today in your 21st century understanding, living in America, it's just hard for you to stomach and understand. But what we have to do to understand this shit is we have to go back, and we're going to do that, and understand the culture and the sexual mores and proclivities of the people of Sodom, Gomorrah, Admah, Zeboam, and Zoar. That's coming down the road. When we get to that, that's when we understand it was no big thing for even children to want to violate adults. I know you don't know that, but I'm going to show you sources and books and proof. Even 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16-year-old children were in on the action to violate and molest and rape these angels. But you get stuck when you read the men of Sodom, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom. You don't have no cultural context to even understand that men are always the ones who initiate shit. Men are the initiators of anything that goes on in biblical times. 99% of the time, it is a man who initiates it. So, of course, the Bible says the men of Sodom, even the men of the city. The men of the city, even the men of Sodom. You get stuck there. But in the same verse, verse 5, verse 4. Verse 4, Genesis 19:4. Once you read where it says, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, surrounded Lot's house, you get stuck there. You get your deer in the headlights on. Even though in the same verse it goes on to say both old and young men, and it goes on to say all the people from every quarter meaning every part of the city. It uses the word people. How do you relegate the violation of two angels to only men when in the same verse it tells you that even the people showed up for some action? And people have never been only men or males. Isn't this enlightening? Isn't this fucking enlightening? Enlightening. And I'm not even gonna get to the part I really want to get to, because I talk a lot. Yep, I'm not gonna do it. I was going to show you how evil Lot and his family are, but that's for part 4. I was going to show you how evil Lot and his family were, that indeed God counted them amongst the unrighteous in Genesis chapter 18, but that's for next part. That's for part 4. Because I see I'm at an hour already. We won't even go there. We will just stay right here. We will stay right here on the fact that it was more than just the men of Sodom that were trying to be some booty bandits. How come you stop right there? Let's go over it again. Let's just stay on this for the next 20 minutes. This is where you get your blinders on. You get your blinders on, your horse blinders. You get the deer in the headlights. When you read, but before these angels lay down, the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, compassed the house round. And I submit to you that the men of the city, even the men of Sodom, it starts out like that because men are always in charge. Men lead the charge. Men are the shit starters. Women don't lead shit in the Bible. Of course it was the men of the city, even the men of Sodom. But you got your deer in the headlights on because all you see is the men of the city, even the men of Sodom. That it was they who compassed the house round. Both old and young. How young are we talking about? I submit to you, we talking about boys even. Because in Israelite tradition, in Israelite society, a boy is basically considered a man at about 12 or 13. So we talking about boys. But because you have on horse blinders, because you have been bitten by the deer in the headlight syndrome, you don't even see the last part of this verse. All the people from every quarter. So who was outside of Lot's house? Men, women, and children. How come you don't teach that? How come you don't see that? Yes, it was the men who were in charge. Yes, it was the men of Sodom who said, we gonna check on these motherfuckers. We're gonna circle the house around. I need all the men folk, boys and girls, boys, young and old. If you're 8 years old, if you're 80 years old, we're gonna surround the house. And then all of the people from every quarter, you all gonna surround the house too. You in the secondary ranks, but we gonna surround the house. It was a mob. It was tens of thousands of people that had surrounded Lot's house. Men, women, and children. All the people from every quarter. Stop me when I start lying. Stop me when I start lying and saying it was just about men. It was just about homosexual men that wanted to rape angels. I submit to you that the culture, that the nature, that the sexual proclivities of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, that they were very sexually profligate, sexually wasteful, that they were licentious and lascivious. I know these are big words. I said the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, they were licentious. The hell does that word mean? What does it mean when Khalil says the people of Sodom and Gomorrah were licentious and lascivious? Let's look at one word at a time. Lascivious. Lascivious, of a person, manner, or gesture, feeling or revealing an overt and often offensive sexual desire. Hear the word, hear the word. Let's turn that up. Turn that up. Hear the word lascivious. Lascivious.
Lascivious. Lascivious.
One more time.
Lascivious. Lascivious. Lascivious.
And what does it say? What does it say? What does the word lascivious mean? This is the nature of the people of Sodom. They were lascivious. Lascivious, of a person, manner, or gesture, feeling or revealing an overt, that means outwardly, overt and often offensive sexual desire. Their offensive sexual desire was to fuck anybody who came to Sodom that was not a citizen of that city. They were lascivious. And they were licentious. Let's go look up that word. Licentious. They were licentious. Say the word.
Licentious. 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 Licentious.
And what does licentious means? Promiscuous and unprincipled in sexual matters. Am I using the right words? Oh, goddamn right. When I tell you that they were lascivious and licentious, they were unprincipled. They were promiscuous. That means they like to fuck a lot. When someone is promiscuous, they like to fuck a lot. They don't care. They just want to fuck, fuck, fuck. They were promiscuous and unprincipled in sexual matters. This is what the Bible doesn't teach you about Sodom and Gomorrah. The Bible doesn't teach you the sexual mores of the inhabitants of Sodom and Gomorrah. I'm teaching it to you. And don't worry, we will bring out references and sources and biblical dictionaries and encyclopedias that's going to back up what I'm saying. But this is why the men of Sodom surrounded the house, and this is why all the people from every quarter showed up as well. Women, girls, and boys, they showed up for some action as well. It was no big thing. It was no great thing. Because in Sodom and Gomorrah, if you weren't a citizen of those cities, you were bound to get raped or murdered. That was their cultural norms back then. We think it's a crazy thing that men would knock on a door and demand angels to come out to get butt fucked. Now we realize that there were women and children there too. But now we think it's gotta be, that's a crazy thing. But what the Bible doesn't do, what Genesis doesn't do, is give you the background, the backstory, the historicity of the people of Sodom and Gomorrah. For if you knew that, you would know that it was no no big thing for them to do what they were doing. Sodom and Gomorrah even had laws. Check this. They even had laws that said a stranger can be raped, butt fucked, violated, and murdered for entering the gates of Sodom without permission. You didn't know that, did you? Neither does the Bible teach us that. Sodom and Gomorrah, Admah and Zeboam and Zoar, the 5 cities that the Bible called the cities of the plain. They were a confederacy, a tight-knit group of 5 cities that did not play that, come all to America. Wasn't no Statue of Liberty saying, bring me your huddled masses. Bring me your immigrants. We'll take care. No, they were not that kind of society. They were a closed group of 5 cities that didn't want nobody's huddled masses. They didn't believe in immigration. They were Donald Trump before President Donald Trump. They didn't want immigrants in their country. Interlopers, foreigners, looky-loos, and rubberneckers just want to come and see what's going on in Sodom and Gomorrah and Admah and Zeboam and Zoar. No, these people said, don't come. We don't want you. And we got laws. We got laws that say, if you come, if you breach our gates, we will butt fuck you. If you breach our gates, we'll put you on beds and stretch your bodies. Tie you down and let the vultures pick at you. We got laws. We don't want you. We are inhospitable. We are a stingy, rich people. Oh yeah, they were rich. We fuck when we want to fuck, and we fuck who we want to fuck. But when you don't know, the sexual climate and the sexual nature and the sexual proclivities and the sexual goings on of these cities, Sodom and Gomorrah, you bitch niggas out there, you try to make this a homosexual thing when it wasn't a homosexual thing. This was about lasciviousness and licentiousness. We've already gone over those words. Sexual immorality. This is about people who had a crazy sexual nature. This is about a people who had unprincipled sexual natures. Unprincipled. And in these unprincipled sexual natures, these were heterosexual straight people. These were bisexual people. And these were homosexual people. But today, we want to lay the blame for Sodom's destruction on one and only one sexual demographic: the gays. The gays. The LGBTQ folks of that day. when you study the culture and history of the Sodomites in Sodom and Gomorrah and those other cities, you realize that these were straight and gay people. The word sodomy means to butt fuck. The word sodomy from Sodom means anal sex. Let's look that up. I might be wrong. But Sodom, from Sodom and Gomorrah, from Sodom, we get the word sodomy. What does the word sodomy mean? Does sodomy mean homosexuality? It doesn't. Sodomy means anal sex. And you can perform anal sex, a man can perform anal sex on a woman as well as another man. So when you think that sodomy only means man on man or male on male, you got the definition wrong. I might be wrong, but let's go look. Sodomy. This is off the dome. Sodomy. Sodium. Sodomy. I said sodomy doesn't have to do with homosexual only. Sodomy has to do with penetration of the rectum, of the anal cavity of the butt. That's what I believe. Let's go see. Maybe I'm wrong. Sodomy. Anal copulation of one male with another. Anal or oral copulation with a member of the opposite sex. See, the first definition is anal copulation, which means anal sex of one male with another male. That's homosexuality. But look at the second one. Anal or oral copulation with a member of the opposite sex. So oral sex is considered sodomy. When your wife or girlfriend gives you a blowjob, she is committing sodomy. So I would ask, now that we have a proper definition of the word sodomy, dare I say we are all sodomites? Dare I say we have all been part of the sodomite community? If you are a straight man and you have penetrated a woman's butthole, you are a sodomite. If you are a woman or a man and you have gone downtown, if a woman goes down on a man and gives him oral copulation, sloppy toppy, dome, brain, head, that's considered sodomy, and you are a sodomite. If a man goes down on a woman and performs cunnilingus, pussy eating, he is performing sodomy, and he is a sodomite. Look at us people today. We want to take the word Sodom and sodomy and strictly relegate it to homosexuals. When we are all sodomites, we have all performed either oral sex or anal sex. We've all done it. If you ain't never sucked a dick, if you ain't never ate no pussy, if you ain't never had no ass sex, then maybe you're excluded. But 98% of us have been a sodomite at one time or another, according to the American Heritage Dictionary. But look how we take that term and we hear sodomy or sodomite and we relegate it to homosexuals. Look at all the various Israelite or Hebrew Israelite camps that be on YouTube talking bad about gay folks, openly calling them sodomites when they have done sodomy themselves. How many times have we seen IUIC, the Hebrew Israelites, or IUSPK, or any of these guys, Sakari Hebrew Israelites, on the highways and byways, on the street corners, talking crazy to a gay person that they call a sodomite, when they themselves are sodomites themselves because they have performed either anal or oral sex on a man or a woman. What a revelation. What a revelation. And so as I wind down this, it's time for you to take off your horse blinders. It's time for you to stop being a deer in the headlight and realize that there were children who were sexually promiscuous, were licentious and lascivious. That they had a sexual immorality that we could never fathom or understand. There were young virgin girls that came to Lot's house hoping that today would be the day they get their hymen busted, that these angels, that these holy angels could bust their cherries. There were some teenage boys that showed up at Lot's house that were of the homosexual variety, that were looking for the opportunity to get down on bended knee and gladly suck the dicks of angels. There were young teenage boys also of a homosexual proclivity that were looking to say they got fucked by an angel. There were young teenage girls